Thus far in this series, from a what to eat perspective, we've determined that we need to reduce added sugars in our diet. The next logical step is to reduce refined carbs. However, there are many people and experts who will advocate actually increasing carbohydrate consumption, and in fact, there are many societies and diets with high carbohydrate intake and low incidence of obesity and Western diseases. This is why the debate over high carb or low carb diets continues to rage and indeed gain fuel and fire. So, at the risk of being caught in the crossfire, let's look and see if carbohydrates really are good, bad, or just misunderstood. All the information in this video comes from the blog of Dr. Jason Fung at Intensive Dietary Management. And in this series, I do gloss over many of the studies that support my statements. So I encourage you to watch the videos in my other series where I really delve deeply into the science and supporting facts for my conclusions. I'm continuing the giveaway for the Amazon gift card, which I'll discuss at the end of the video, as well as my thoughts about that and the channel moving forward. So we've established that insulin and insulin resistance cause and drive obesity. Refined carbohydrates like sugar and flour increase insulin levels the most of any foods. Unfortunately, because some carbs are bad, most of us over time decided that all carbs must be bad. However, there's a huge difference between a bad carb and a good carb. Kale, spinach, and broccoli are all carbohydrates, but you'll never get fat eating them in large amounts. But eating sugar, in even small amounts consistently, will surely cause you to gain weight. If anyone would care to argue the veracity of that, feel free to write it in the comments. Food industry credentials are optional. So, how are these carbs different? Well, all of this began in 1981 with Dr. David Jenkins at the University of Toronto and the Glycemic Index, or GI. I venture to say that most people watching or listening are familiar with that term. The Glycemic Index measures how foods tend to raise blood sugars. Since fat and protein raise serum glucose very little, this index became a measure for carbohydrates. Now, the way this works is to take 50 grams of each carbohydrate and measure the effect on blood glucose. This is then compared to the reference food, glucose, which has a score of 100. The issue is that a standard serving of a food might not necessarily contain 50 grams of carbohydrate. So if we compare, say, watermelon, which has a GI score of 72, to a corn tortilla, which has a GI score of 52, it would seem that we're better off eating the tortilla. But not so fast. A serving of watermelon is only 5% carbohydrate by volume. It consists of a lot of water, meaning that you would have to eat 2.2 pounds or 1 kilogram of watermelon to get 50 grams of carbs. Now that's way, way beyond a serving. But the corn tortilla is 48% carbohydrate by weight, meaning you only need to eat 104 grams to get the 50 grams of carbohydrates. And that's a single serving of a corn tortilla. So in order to correct this issue in the GI, we got the glycemic load index. Now the glycemic load of 100 grams serving of food can be calculated as its carbohydrate content measured in grams, multiplied by the food's GI, and then divided by 100. So, for example, the previous watermelon has a GI of 72. A 100 gram serving of watermelon has 5 grams of available carbohydrates, making the calculation 5 times 72 divided by 100 equals 3.6. So the glycemic load of the watermelon is 4. But the corn tortilla ends up with a glycemic load of 42. Now, that seems closer to correct, don't you think? But whether you classify food using the glycemic index or the glycemic load index, it becomes clear that there is a difference between refined carbohydrates and unrefined foods. Traditional unprocessed foods have low glycemic load scores despite containing similar amounts of carbohydrates, meaning that carbohydrates are not inherently fattening. It's the processing and refining of them that makes them fattening and poisonous in metabolic terms. Now, obviously, carbohydrates aren't actually poisonous, but metaphorically to metabolic processes. The problem with processing a carbohydrate is that this increases the glycemic index of the carb in question. Processing removes fat, fiber, and protein. This serves to increase the speed of digestion as well as the speed of absorption. The aforementioned macronutrients are inherent in the unrefined carbohydrate to slow down the digestion and absorption. Another problem with processing carbohydrates and food in general is that it leads to overconsumption. Let's look at the quote-unquote wholesome glass of orange juice. Lots of people start with one of these every morning. Now, one glass of orange juice generally requires about 4 or 5 oranges. I don't know about you, but I can drink a glass of orange juice in just a few gulps. How long would it take me to eat 5 oranges? Heck, I'm not even sure I could or would want to eat 5 oranges. An orange has large amounts of fiber as pulp. When we process the orange, we remove everything but the carbohydrate and then tend to overconsume what's left. In this case, orange-tasting sugar water, which is much, much easier to eat and eat and eat. It makes much more sense when you look at it visually. These pictures show what equal grams of carbs look like when whole or when processed. One is pure carb and easy to consume and digest. The other contains high amounts of fat, fiber, and protein. So when you go to pick up that cauliflower crust for your pizza or those chips made from vegetables, just remember that they've been so processed that they really aren't vegetables anymore. They're just carbohydrates. And just as with the misleading aspects of the glycemic index, the carb count on a bag of veggie chips may be lower than a serving of vegetables, but they have very, very different effects on your body. The real issue here is one of balance. The human body was designed and adapted over thousands of years to the balance of nutrients within whole, unprocessed foods. When we process and highly refine a food to leave only one portion of that food, we throw off the natural balance. There are societies that have, and still do, eat high amounts of whole, natural, unprocessed carbohydrates, and have enjoyed thousands of years with no incidence of obesity or diabetes. The poison is in the processing. These societies do not eat highly refined foods. But the countries who've adopted a Western style of eating do eat very high levels of refined foods, and especially refined carbohydrates. And that's why we've seen a spike in the levels of obesity and diabetes all around the globe. The main carbohydrates in these countries are refined grains. And what is the refined grain of choice? Wheat. But wait a second. Wheat, like rice and corn, has been around for thousands, I dare say tens of thousands of years. How can it possibly be so bad for us? What could possibly have happened to change wheat from a staple of a healthy diet to the villainous food that it is today? And that's exactly what we'll discuss in the next video in this series. So please subscribe and enable alerts so you don't miss it. And if you're so inclined, please click the like button, as it does help to gain exposure for the channel. The rules for the giveaway are here, so go ahead and check them out. Now, my thinking behind this giveaway was mainly so that someone could buy a copy of each of Dr. Fung's books, the Obesity Code and the Diabetes Code. These books account for a lot of the content in my videos. I have links to them on my website under suggested reading. I felt so much support from the community that we've created together that I simply wanted to find a way to give back. I'm hoping to release new videos on a more regular schedule, which I hope will reinvigorate my viewers as well as myself to keep learning and getting healthy. That's always been the goal of this channel. So with that in mind, I'll say thanks for watching, and until next time, keep being a loser.